Hi to our global audience on live stream. If you'd like to share today, don't forget hashtag WEF23. Also, we'll have a Q&A session at the end of this panel, so you can all join in, of course. Just grab me, I'll have someone bring around a microphone for you. We're here to talk about the success stories, so the best practice, some great examples from around the world and how to implement this type of thinking, and give people like me the opportunity to work in a safe workplace. When I jump on a flight anywhere around the world as a journalist in my work capacity or private life, I have to brief my boyfriend, tell him not to hold my hand. To particular countries, there are things that you have to think about that other couples may never have thought about in their lives. But again, we're here to talk about the positives and the progression that we're making to give you an idea of how you can make a difference as well in your company, for your workforce, for yourselves, how you can change lives and change the world to a certain extent. So let me introduce you to our panelists, starting at the far right for you, Fahad Jamaluddin, Global Shaper from Lebanon, Sarah Kate Ellis from GLAAD, Tirana Hassan from Human Rights Watch, and Sharon Marcel from BCG, Boston Consulting Group. Let me start with Tirana. Could you tell us about the progression that is being made around the world, to give people an overview, first of all?
Sure. I mean, if we want to look at the long arc of history, we have made some significant progress. In 2008, Human Rights Watch did a report looking at the colonial origins of sodomy laws around the world. And back then we had identified, 80 countries which had very repressive laws on the books. And now we find ourselves at a point where that's down to 70. Which is some level of progress. And in the last year, even, we've seen that there have been some very practical steps that have been taken. Singapore is one of the most recent examples that is decriminalised. It's actually decriminalised. It's taken the legislation off the books, but at the same time, Singapore fortified the rules around same-sex marriage. Mm-hmm. And so, it's not always a win. And they did that because they were playing to the more conservative base, which was agreeing to decriminalisation, but still wanted to embrace sort of the more conservative parts of the country's population. We've also seen progress in the Caribbean. We had 3 countries across the Caribbean who all have decriminalised and taken steps for decriminalisation. What I would say in relation to these steps is that, the democratic institutions, like the courts, countries where they function, are fundamentally important to actually bring about the change that we need to see, to deliver on structural long-term change. And I think, across the world, we still see that same-sex activity is outlawed in 67 countries. So that just indicates to us that, this is not a fight that is over. We still need to be, vigilant and continue to progress. What we have seen is that, all over the world, you can challenge the constitutional basis. We have international law, for example, and that's been one of the great progressions over time, is we've seen LGBTQI rights actually emerge in bodies of international law. So we've been able to use these, and where countries have signed on to their commitments, be able to actually challenge repressive laws that are on the books within constitutional courts or Supreme Courts. So, there are certainly some courts which are less free, but I think that as we develop domestic bodies of law and international law, we're going to be able to utilise that to be able to see long-term structural change.
Tirana, how do you convince people that this is a basic human right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that actually it's the LGBT community as a whole who's actually led this fight, But, we've been talking about what are the solutions, and there are currently, it's not just the rights of the community that are under assault. There is a very dangerous law on the books at the moment. It's, I believe it's a private members bill in Ghana that is particularly problematic, where it's going to make it pretty much impossible to talk about being gay, lesbian, or even to advocate on these issues. And actually, part of the danger of this legislation is that it could also hold social media platforms responsible for disseminating information. So, you know, we need to make sure that in this instance that we have the platforms that are, you know, telling these stories, that are disseminating information. This is a really important point in time where where it would be helpful for the corporations in that space to be able to stand up, to be able to articulate public positions to the government.
Sharon, so profiling perhaps a gay CEO, but what about in education as well? A completely different kettle of fish. Primary school, so from grade 1 to grade 7 in Australia, was a breeze.
May I just say one thing on that, because that is a battleground that we're facing in the United States right now. Tough moment right now in education in the United States, and I'm absolutely sure it's being exported globally, this kind of framework that they've come up with that's been really effective over the past year, and they're legislating against it as well.
Tirana, can you give us any advice for that sector?
I mean, well, I think that actually it's not so much just about the education sector, it's about keeping track of where the political narrative more broadly is going. So when you start seeing the othering, this is a broader human rights issue, and we must situate it in that way. We should see the assaults on LGBT rights as an assault on human rights, and that's an assault on all of our rights. That's a constitutional issue, that's an individual rights issue. So, you know, don't wait until we're seeing it play out in the classroom, till you're waiting till children they have license to be beaten up in the playground.
I have to say something when it comes to school, because I think there is so much happening on the ground that we're still failing to capture. When it comes to educators who are pushing different narratives, when it comes to principals who are also trying to leverage different tools in order to make this wheel move.
Mm-hmm. So that's where the media comes back in. Again, that's where the community support and the connections between public and private come into effect. There's a question here.
Thank you. Sorry for my voice. My name is Françoise Mudote. I'm the CEO of the African Women's Development Fund based in Ghana. And thank you so much for sharing that example. I just wanted to share 2 invitations in relation to how we can work with the LGBTQI and feminist movements, especially in the Global South, who are doing that work of bridging the gap between, you know, centering this issue as a human rights issue. Mm-hmm. The first invitation, based on the example of Ghana, is to use the power that especially big companies have to be a force of resistance, because we can trace directly the resourcing for homophobia in Ghana, straight line to the US churches, and this has been documented in CNN like last month. And we don't have another force that balances it out. And I think there's big companies that are based in Ghana and other countries that can play that role. And the second invitation is to work with and fund those movements, either through global or regional dedicated feminist funds that do that work, like Australia, ISDAO in West Africa, UHI in Eastern Africa. This is so critical because their work is so dangerous and so underfunded. And I just think that there's a great amount of wealth and resources in this room that is not connecting to those movements. So just 2 invitations from Africa. Thank you.
So a country standing when it comes to investors,
right,
willing to put their money, their workforces in that part of the world. Mm-hmm. Are there any other questions?